Congress are hot on the trail of UFO secrets reportedly held by the Pentagon, including allegations that alien materials are being stashed and studied by aerospace contractors.
Now, at least one prominent defense contractor is letting it be known that it is actively seeking government contracts that might involve UFO technology.
Long lost but famous UFO photo has been found.
This is an interesting one, Erica. I'm going to show it to you, but I want to give you the backstory on this first because it's important. We're going to look at a little dramatization of what happened on August 4th, 1990. This is in Scotland. Two young men who were working as chefs in a nearby hotel near Calvin, Scotland, decided to go for a hike in the hills after a long day in the kitchen. They hadn't gone far when they saw a huge, solid, diamond-shaped object they described as 100-foot long, hovering silently in the sky above them.
Nellis is one of the places rumored to house mysterious materials of unknown origin. The story, first reported by us more than 3 decades ago, is that a super-secret program housed in or near Nevada's Area 51 military base has been trying to reverse engineer alien technology.
I am the Martian ambassador. We come in peace. We come in peace. We come in peace.
Well, it is a rainy day here on the west coast of Florida, but we're at the Soul Trap nonetheless, and we are glad to be with you. We trust that whenever this broadcast finds you, it finds you in good health, good spirits, and as we so often say, on that good and narrow way. We're glad that you tuned in, and we've got a lot that we want to cover with you today. But first of all, I want to remind you, make sure to check out thesoultrap.com. That is the hub for all things that will make your life better, complete, fulfilled, and just downright fun. Make sure you check it out. Also go to YouTube and subscribe and share the Soul Trap. We're on Rumble and all the other sites where you can pick up podcasts. We're glad you're with us, and we're excited about today's show. We're going to be talking about something that's one of our bread and butter subjects around here, and that is UFOs. Only this time, we're coming at it from a little bit of a different angle. We have always said that there really is no such thing as little green men. If I've answered the question once, I have answered it 1,000 times. I do not believe that out there beyond the great beyond, there is a planet, Mars or anywhere else, where there are little green men that are sending these probes, these scouting missions, these reconnaissance details to check out the earth and all of that. I don't think that that's it at all. In fact, I'm certain that that's not it. We don't believe that there are little green men that are coming from another planet. What we do believe is that many of the sightings, many of them can be easily explained by simply people seeing what they want to see or misseeing what they're seeing. The other thing we talk about quite often is the dimensional spiritual sightings. The fact of the matter is, the Bible tells us that Satan is the prince of the power of the air. And we see that so often throughout the Bible, and that these sightings that people see are actually interdimensional realities, and maybe not always the powers of darkness. We know that angelic beings have a great deal to do with what's going on in the skies above us as well. But one thing that is often lost on us, and we don't talk a great deal about, is the military. We are so far advanced beyond what the general public actually knows that many times we just assume that it's either alien or dimensional or something like that, and we forget the fact that there really is an advanced military industrial complex that I believe is actually running the nation, quite possibly the world, and the advanced technology that they have is far beyond anything that we can imagine, and many times that is what we are seeing. We are not seeing an interdimensional being. We are not seeing even something that is explainable within our frame of reference. What we are seeing is military hardware that has not been released to the public. And I think that this story is one of those possibilities. It could be categorized possibly as a dimensional interaction, but I think more likely it is something that is categorized as military. And remember now, back in the 70s, the B-17 and stealth bombers were being tested. There were a lot of tests that were taking place out at Groom Lake. We know that as Area 51. There were a lot of these secret tests going on. So imagine if you were out in Arizona, New Mexico, you were out there, you're driving through the desert one night, and overhead you see this triangular looking what you would consider spaceship UFO fly over you at low altitude, high speeds. You would have assumed, without a doubt, that you were looking at a UFO. Well, what you were really seeing, what you were really looking at, was a B-17 stealth bomber. And even today, it looks eerily out of this world. Now, to be fair, Bob Lazar and others actually say that some of our stealth technology is reverse engineering from alien spacecraft that crash landed. But that is a whole nother show for a whole nother topic for a whole nother show. What we are talking about is military hardware that we are seeing. And I think that this story that we're going to talk about from the Daily Mail is exactly that. And it's a very, very interesting story. And what makes this story so profoundly interesting is the picture. Every time you go to look at a UFO picture, a UFO video, there's always just enough distortion for you not to really make it out. You see lights, but you don't see a shape. Or you see a shape, but it's kind of weird. It's this or that. But in this particular story, the shape, the picture, is so crystal clear and so undeniably true and so accurately amateur that there's no way to get around the fact that what you're looking at is a real picture that was taken by people of something that was real there in the sky. Well, the story is told in the Daily Mail by David Clark, revealed after 32 years, quote, the most spectacular UFO photo ever captured, or glimpses, possibly, of one of America's most secretive airplane programs. Here's the basic overview. On August 4th, 1990, two young men were working as chefs in a hotel in the Highland area in Scotland, just outside of a very famous national park. At about 9 p.m., after a long day in the kitchen, they drove out about 13 miles north along the A9 to what was called Calvin, a spot on the edge there of the park for a walk in the hills. They hadn't gone far when they saw a huge, solid, diamond-shaped object about 100 feet long, hovering silently in the sky above them. Terrified, they hid in the bushes and observed as best they could. Now what's fascinating is, minutes later, they heard another jet enter into the area. This was an RAF jet. There were two squadrons that were stationed of the Tornado fighters, and they were on what was called a 24-hour standby alert. And you have to remember, this was back in 1990. We were still sort of at the back end of the Cold War, and they were there stationed for a 24-hour intercept in case of a Russian intruder aircraft. So, as these two young men were hiding in the bushes watching this strangely shaped craft, for lack of a better word, all of a sudden, here comes an RAF Tornado fighter zooming into the area. The jet went past the craft that they were observing. It circled, quote, the thing before heading off on its original course, as if the pilot had seen the object and had come back to look for a closer look. They could not help but think that it was called off from the thing, quote unquote, because it just moved away so abruptly. In other words, it was such an odd sight that why that jet went away, they couldn't quite figure it out. Eventually, the two men grabbed their camera out from where they were hiding and fired off 6 frames. Now, again, this was 1990. This wasn't when everybody was carrying an iPhone in their back pocket and can pull it out. They grabbed their camera, pointed up, and shot vertically towards where this craft was. What's fascinating is that the craft did not, quote unquote, zoom away or fly away. It was there. There appeared to be some distortion, and then the craft disappeared up into the sky. It began to make a motion up, and it began to disappear and fade away. They were convinced, of course, that what they had just seen was a UFO. They took their photos to the Daily Record, one of Scotland's leading newspapers, but no story was ever printed. Now that's a fascinating thing, because whether they believe in UFOs or not, what papers like is a good story. And a good story sells, and you especially have a good story when you have good photographs. You're going to see in just a moment that they have excellent photographs, and yet the story was never printed. The paper actually passed on the pictures to the Ministry of Defense, and then the photographs simply vanished along with the two young chefs. There was no story written about them. They never came out in any kind of magazine. Nothing ever came of it. It's as if the story was squashed, pushed away, filed in an X-file, for lack of a better phrase, and it went away until now, that is, the article states. Here, for the first time recently, the pictures and the story has been revealed. A photograph that was described as one of the most spectacular UFO pictures ever taken, and quote-unquote the holy grail in terms of hard evidence that these things really exist, has been revealed because one of the chefs did not get rid of all the pictures. It is a picture, and the National Archives have tried their utmost to keep it hidden. But the information has been released after 30 years. The Ministry of Defense has not released their original photographs, but the witnesses were able to keep theirs, and they did. And the pictures themselves are stunning. I'm looking at the picture right now. You're looking at the picture on your screen. And it is indeed a diamond-shaped craft, for lack of a better word. And in the distance, and this is what makes it so fascinating, in the distance, you can actually see the RAF Tornado jet flying by. Now, it's a very interesting picture. There have been a lot of people that have done research on this picture, and they've said, listen, this isn't a fake. In my studio office, I have the picture that was made famous by the X-Files, where it has the UFO hovering above the tree, and it says, "I want to believe." Well, I love the picture, I love the show, but the picture, the photograph was a fake, and it was clearly a fake. It was obviously that it was just not real. But when you look at this picture, you have in the foreground the fence, you have in the distance the fighter, and it gives perspective to what you're looking at. Now, this is long before drones, supposedly. This is long before what we were expecting to see. If you were looking at it today, you might go, well, that must be a drone, or that must be some kind of hovercraft. Whatever it is, it's there. They're seeing it, and it's a fascinating and amazing picture. So the article states, what do we make of it? Well, the moment that Craig showed the photograph to many reporters, and specifically to David Clark here of the Daily Mail, David Clark said, "I knew I was looking at something exceptional," and he's right. The story is average. It's a run-of-the-mill story, but the picture is what makes it spectacular. It is a black and white image, and they have printed it on color paper to try to bring to the foreground some of the light. But David states in his article, the trees, the fence, they all look a little bit blurry, but you would expect that if the photographer took it in a moment of panic. And if you were there, panic, nerves, whatever you want to call it, you would have been doing the same thing. David states this is all consistent with their story. But the issue is the camera is focused on the weird diamond-shaped object in the center of the frame. And unlike many other UFO images, this is clearly a structured craft of unknown origin. It looks otherworldly and unlike any conventional aircraft. Now, that's true. Now, that's a very important point that he makes there. He states it's clearly a structured craft. Now, if you're a follower of the UFO lore, you'll know that when he made the statement structured craft, that categorized it underneath the subheading of different UFO phenomenon, because there are two, other than structured, there are two primary categories of the UFO phenomenon. The first is light. In other words, you'll see people talk about it was just pure light. It was a ball of light. We saw that in the Phoenix lights, if you've ever, for simple point of reference. You see the lights, but there's no other structure around it. That's one category. The other category is what people have called translucent. They call it almost the jellyfish UFO. It's almost as if it's a biological entity, that the superstructure of what they're looking at is translucent, it's more fleshy than it is structural. But this picture seems to show a structured craft. And of course it states that it looks otherworldly, but I don't think that it looks otherworldly. I tend to think what they might be seeing here is an unconventional aircraft for 1990, not an unconventional aircraft for 2022. Now, what begs the question is, if they had unconventional drone-like aircraft like this in 1990, what in the world do they have right now? Now, the article goes on to state, David, who is writing it, says, by far it is the best UFO photo that I have ever seen. Quote, believe me, I'm no gullible, deluded conspiracy theorist. I kind of feel a personal attack on that, but anyway.
Emotional damage!
He said, I'd grown cynical after viewing hundreds of unconvincing photographs and films. Blurry, grainy, out of focus shots of what easily could have been frisbees, street lamps, or even seagulls. And he's right. A lot of these pictures, when you look at them, and don't get mad, I love you guys, but I get picture after picture, issue after issue. But a lot of this stuff is like you look at it and go, yeah, that's a seagull. That's what that is. But this one, man, it is different. Look at the picture again on your screen. Check it out. It's very clearly not a fake, and it is very clearly something there. And that's why David states this was clearly something different. I've since had it analyzed by Andrew Robinson, a senior lecturer, he states, in photography at the Sheffield University. He is convinced it is genuine, and if it is a hoax, then a highly elaborate one involving expensive, sophisticated equipment and flying models, not at the disposal of two hotel chefs, which is right. And if you did say, let's say we take the other side, you go, no, it was a hoax. Well, they didn't make any money off the hoax. They didn't get any fame. It didn't get put in the paper. It was a hoax that fell flat. David said, he told me, speaking of Andrew Robinson, the photography specialist, quote, my conclusion is that the object is definitely in front of the camera. That is, it's not a fake produced in post-production. And its placement within the scene appears to be approximately halfway between the foreground fence and the plane in the background. The Pentagon released its long-awaited report on what it now calls UAPs, or unidentified aerial phenomenon, after a spate of similar sightings and the release of films showing fast UFOs that were taken by U.S. Navy pilots. If you remember, we did a show on that, the infamous Tic Tac. Is that what it is? The Tic Tac video. And then the gimbal videos. And what's fascinating is that the sightings that are taking place now are not from what you would consider conspiracy UFO guys. These are Navy pilots, airplane pilots, people that are seeing things that are going on. The new American UAP task force listed 5 categories that most sightings, when resolved, would likely fall into. And one of these is what we've been talking about, classified programs developed by the U.S. government. David writes, I'm convinced that the Calvin photograph shows one of these classified programs. Meanwhile, the American, and possibly our own, he's speaking of Scottish government, have found it useful to keep the myth of UFOs flying because it provides a useful cover for their covert military activities. But in this case, their cover was blown by 2 young men who happened to be at the right place at the wrong time, getting the right picture that was never shown. The Ministry of Defense has to explain to the public why, if there are no such things as UFOs, they keep having these pictures crop up. So what exactly did they see, and what was it that they photographed? Well, David in his article believes that it was one of the classified programs. One of the classified programs. Well, what kind of classified program? A drone? Possibly. But there is an interesting connection with what's going on today. And one of the most popular lores out there in the UFO classified military experiment program is Project Aurora. There is a great article by Victoria on Mail Online talking about Project Aurora. She states, so secret its existence is not even acknowledged. The futuristic Aurora spy plane that travels at 6 times the speed of sound is blamed for the mysterious booms heard all over the world. Now, if you've been following this, you will know that whether it's sky trumpets or booms, and in fact, being here on the coast of Tampa, I can remember it wasn't all that super long ago, maybe a couple years ago, that there was a huge report of booms that were being heard out in the Gulf of Mexico. We know that that happens up in the Pensacola area. We know that these have been reported. What's happening? Well, Victoria actually covered a case that took place over the weekend there in the English area. The origin of the mysterious booms or bangs heard across the UK and New York. Now those are pretty distant. You got a pretty large body of water separating those two. But over the weekend, she believes were probably caused by Project Aurora. A leading theory is that these booms were created by an aircraft possibly traveling at supersonic or hypersonic speeds above the Atlantic. This has led conspiracy theorists to attribute the booms to a spy plane, rumored to be under development by the U.S. military under the code name Aurora. Aurora is rumored to be a top secret aircraft that has been in development since 1990. These claims originated in Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine. In November 2013, Lockheed Martin announced it was developing something very similar to the SR-72 spy plane, said to be able to accelerate up to Mach 6. Now, one particular engineer stated that there is claims that these loud bangs that are being heard around the world are in fact these planes, this Project Aurora, that is actually going hypersonic. What's very interesting is that the sounds that were heard over the English area, within 2 minutes, there were also Twitter reports of similar sounds being heard in New York. So imagine that timeline. Sounds heard off the English coast, 2 minutes later, sounds being heard in the New York area, being reported on Twitter. Now that's a large distance to go through in a short amount of time. Is it possible that the Aurora project is not just something of lore and folklore, that it is a reality? One writer says it's conceivable that with that sort of power, speed, and altitude, the sound would carry over a vast distance. Enthusiasts claim that such a supersonic or hypersonic plane could be what caused the strange noises at the weekend. In particular, an expert said the sound is similar to that is created by what is called pulse detonation engines. Pulse detonation engines. It's a very, very fascinating new concept that has come around. And these pulse detonating engines are what they believe are fueling the Aurora plane. Now, unless you are an engineer, a rocket engineer, you're not going to know right off the bat what a pulse detonating engine is. But neither do I. But I can read. And when you look it up, what it does is that the pulse detonating engine, the PDE, actually works by using force from a series of explosions, quote unquote, caused by mixing of fuel, mist, and air intake to thrust itself forward. It can theoretically power planes at 5 times the speed of sound. A PDE can detonate between 60 and 100 times a second, and its contrails appear to look like rings on a rope. And more we're starting to see some of these ringed contrails. According to experts, including Dr. Philip Atcliffe, senior lecturer in aeronautical engineering at Stanford University, if a passenger jet flew at Mach 6 at current jet altitudes, say around 30,000 feet, the sonic boom could damage buildings. Officials routinely deny that Aurora exists, but that has not dampened the spirit of those of us that are constantly on the prowl. A lot of people are pointing to the strange and mysterious sightings of triangular objects, some that were seen in the North Sea, some that were seen over England, some being seen over the Phoenix Light area and in other places. As was said before, Aurora is reported to be able to travel Mach 5 to Mach 8, and some people believe Mach 9. Its length, the Aurora, is rumored to be about 110 feet by 60 feet wide. And its regular speed is in its primary engine, and then at a certain level it generates the PDE engine and takes over. This detonation of multiple detonations would sound more like one detonation to those of us on the ground. What it's actually doing is it's breaking through what's called the thrust wall. It's traveling so fast that it is pushing through the air and breaking through the wall of air in front of it. As it's pushing through the air reacts, some people say, like fluid to a supersonic object. As objects travel through the air, molecules are pushed aside with great force, and this forms what is called a shock wave, like a boat would create waves going through water. The width of the so-called boom or carpet noise beneath the aircraft is about 1 mile and reaches about 1,000 feet of altitude. That's why when you hear it, it sounds above and it's moving very fast. The sonic boom is created when the aircraft and other type of vehicles fly overhead faster than the speed of sound at hypersound. Again, the air is reacting like a supersonic fluid that is being ripped open. This is a very fascinating thing. Now, this new type of travel have been called hyperdetonation, hypersonic travel, and the new jets that use them are called scramjets. Scramjets have been under development for decades, but a breakthrough came in 2013 when the U.S. Air Force and its research laboratories at Boeing, Wave Rider, flew for over 240 seconds over the Pacific on scramjet power. They actually reported to have reached Mach 5.1, running until its fuel was exhausted. Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works, and if you've been around any kind of UFO research, you know how profound the Skunk Works phrase is. They said that they built a new Blackbird plane that was able to go faster than anyone could possibly have imagined. They are now using this same technology in missiles and trying to do that in long-term planes that can spend a long term up in the air. Most of it is used for reconnaissance, although they're saying now that these planes, though unconventional, can eventually be used as strike planes, strike forces. So, the picture that you see on the screen, what is that? Is it a drone? Is it a highly elaborate hoax? Or is it something from early Project Aurora experiments? Now, one last little connection. One of the most popular movies out is Top Gun Maverick, the second Top Gun. And I've not seen it, but I've heard that it's a great, great movie. We also know that the government every once in a while likes to throw these little snippets in movies. They like to let us know a little bit here or there, and for whatever reason, these little tidbits get thrown in. Go watch the movie or look at the replays. Maverick is a test pilot at the very beginning of the movie. And the plane that he's flying, if you look on your screen, looks very, 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 very much like the Aurora plane and what researchers believe that it is. So it could be that we should be more concerned about our government than little green men, and I think we should. Next time you hear a boom overhead, it could be an F-16, it could be some kind of construction program going on across town, or it could be Project Aurora. Regardless, there's something going on up in the sky. Some of it dimensional, some of it psychological, and some of it is Skunk Works. And the mystery of Groom Lake and what's actually taking place in all the black projects, off-book projects that our government is using your money for.